Sometimes people do not fall in love with the real you. They fall in love with the version of you that stays quiet, the version that keeps forgiving, the version that keeps giving love even while emotionally exhausted, the version that tolerates pain silently just to keep the connection alive. And for a long time you mistake this for love because they give you attention, affection, moments of closeness that make your heart feel needed. But slowly, something inside you begins breaking. You realize you are constantly changing yourself around them, hiding your true feelings, walking carefully around their emotions, staying silent about things that deeply hurt you. And the moment you finally begin protecting your peace, everything changes. Suddenly you are different. Suddenly you are cold. Suddenly the same people who benefited from your softness begin feeling uncomfortable with your healing. Why? Because some people were never attached to the real you. They were attached to the version of you they could control. And Buddhism teaches something deeply painful about attachment. The moment you abandon yourself to keep love alive, suffering quietly enters your life. So if your heart has been feeling emotionally tired, if you have been losing yourself trying to keep people happy, if your soul feels exhausted from constantly shrinking itself just to remain loved, then this message may find you at the exact moment you need it most. Tonight we are going to talk about emotional control, unhealthy attachment, and the Buddhist truth about why real love should never require you to betray your inner peace. The version of you they loved was the one they could control. Many people do not truly fall in love with the real you. They fall in love with the version of you that makes their life easier. The version that always says yes. The version that never complains. The version that keeps giving love, attention, time, and energy even when completely exhausted inside. They love the version of you that stays quiet after being hurt, the version that forgives too quickly, the version that keeps understanding everyone else while nobody tries to understand you. And at first, you do not notice what is happening, because when someone gives you affection, attention, emotional closeness, or comfort, it feels like love. It feels warm, safe, special. So naturally, you begin doing more to keep that connection alive. You start adjusting yourself around them. Maybe you stop speaking honestly because you do not want conflict. Maybe you hide your pain because you are scared of pushing them away. Maybe you pretend certain words did not hurt because you fear being called too sensitive. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin losing pieces of yourself. This happens to many people, especially people with soft hearts. People who deeply care about others often become experts at abandoning themselves. They become emotionally available for everyone. They listen to everyone's pain. They support everyone during hard times. But when it comes to their own emotions, they stay silent, because somewhere in life they learned a dangerous lesson. If I become easy to love, people will stay. So they become the peaceful one, the understanding one, the self-sacrificing one, even when it hurts them deeply. Buddhism teaches that attachment often begins when we seek our worth through other people's acceptance, and this creates suffering, because now your happiness depends on keeping everyone comfortable. You become afraid of disappointing people, afraid of saying no, afraid of creating distance, so you slowly shape yourself into the version others prefer, not the version that feels true inside, the version that feels acceptable. And controlling people often notice this very quickly. They become comfortable with your silence, comfortable with your endless patience, comfortable with the fact that you always return, no matter how hurt you feel. Over time, they stop seeing your kindness as something precious. They begin expecting it. Your emotional sacrifice becomes normal to them. And this is where the pain quietly begins. Because deep inside, you start feeling emotionally invisible. You notice that your needs are rarely considered. Your feelings are rarely protected. Your peace is rarely important. But still, you keep trying harder. You give more love, more patience, more understanding, hoping one day they will finally love you the same way you love them. But real love should not require you to erase yourself. Real love should not make you feel emotionally exhausted all the time. A healthy connection allows you to breathe, to speak honestly, to exist without fear. But when someone only loves the version of you they can control, they become uncomfortable the moment you begin changing. The moment you start setting boundaries, the moment you stop over-explaining, the moment you stop accepting disrespect, their behavior changes. Suddenly they say things like, "You changed. You are not the same anymore. You used to care more. You became cold." But what they truly mean is, "You no longer make control easy for me." And this realization can be heartbreaking, because you start understanding that some people were never attached to your soul. They were attached to your obedience. They loved how available you were, how forgiving you were, how much pain you tolerated without leaving. But the moment you began respecting yourself, the relationship started feeling different. Buddhism teaches that suffering begins when we live too far away from our true self, and many people spend years performing a false version of themselves just to keep love in their life. They smile while hurting, agree while unhappy, stay while emotionally breaking inside. And after a while, they no longer recognize who they truly are. This is why self-awareness is so important, because the moment you become honest with yourself, you begin seeing which relationships require you to shrink your soul just to keep them alive. And no relationship is worth losing yourself completely. Your peace matters too. Your emotions matter too. And the real people meant for your life will never ask you to become smaller just to make them feel comfortable. Some people call it love, but it's really emotional control. One of the most painful things a person can realize is that not every relationship built on emotional closeness is built on real love. Sometimes what looks like love on the outside is actually emotional control hidden behind attention, care, and attachment. And the dangerous part is that emotional control rarely looks obvious in the beginning. It does not always come with shouting, anger, or direct manipulation. Sometimes it comes through sweetness, constant attention, emotional dependency, or guilt that slowly enters your heart without you noticing. At first, it can feel comforting when someone wants to know everything about your life. It can feel special when someone constantly wants your attention, your time, your energy, and your emotional focus. You may even think, "This person cares deeply about me." But over time, something begins feeling emotionally heavy inside you. You slowly realize that the connection only feels peaceful when you behave the way they want you to behave. You notice that they become distant whenever you focus on yourself. They become uncomfortable when you create boundaries. They become cold when you stop giving them constant emotional reassurance. And without realizing it, you begin changing your behavior just to avoid upsetting them. You begin watching your words carefully. You begin overthinking simple conversations. You begin carrying guilt for wanting personal space, peace, or emotional freedom. This is how emotional control quietly enters a relationship. It slowly teaches you that love must be earned through obedience. It teaches you that if you become too independent, too confident, too emotionally strong, or too honest about your feelings, the connection may disappear. So you start shrinking yourself emotionally to keep the relationship safe. Many people live like this for years without understanding what is happening to them. They think they are protecting love, but in reality they are slowly abandoning themselves. They stop expressing what truly hurts them because they fear conflict. They stop asking for emotional respect because they fear rejection. They stop behaving naturally because they fear losing connection. And the saddest part is that after a while, this emotional pressure becomes normal to them. They become so used to carrying other people's emotions that they forget their own emotions matter too. Buddhism teaches that attachment creates suffering because attachment often tries to possess people instead of understanding them. Real love does not try to control another person's spirit. Real love does not become threatened when someone grows emotionally. Real love does not punish someone for healing, changing, or discovering their self-worth. But emotional control is different. Emotional control wants access to your mind all the time. It wants your attention to remain available at all times. It wants your identity to stay small enough to manage. And the moment you begin thinking for yourself, protecting your peace, or creating healthy distance, the controlling energy inside the relationship begins reacting emotionally. This is why many people hear phrases like, "You changed," right after they begin healing. But healing is not becoming cold. Healing is not becoming selfish. Healing is finally becoming emotionally honest after years of self-neglect. People who truly love you do not become uncomfortable when you grow stronger. They do not become angry when you stop tolerating disrespect. They do not fear your confidence, your boundaries, or your emotional independence. Healthy love creates safety, not fear. It allows both people to breathe emotionally without constantly feeling pressured, guilty, or emotionally trapped. Many people confuse emotional intensity with love because they grew up believing love must feel difficult, painful, or emotionally exhausting. They think jealousy means deep care. They think emotional dependence means connection. They think constant emotional chaos means passion. But Buddhism teaches something very different. Peace is one of the clearest signs of healthy connection. A relationship that constantly destroys your inner peace cannot continue forever without damaging your spirit. When someone truly loves you, you feel emotionally safe enough to be yourself completely. You do not feel like you must constantly perform, constantly prove your loyalty, or constantly sacrifice your emotional well-being just to maintain closeness. You are allowed to have boundaries. You are allowed to have your own thoughts. You are allowed to grow into a stronger version of yourself without fear that love will disappear. But emotional control quietly teaches the opposite lesson. It teaches you to stay small, to keep love alive. It teaches you to prioritize another person's comfort over your own emotional truth. And eventually, you begin living a life that looks peaceful from the outside while feeling emotionally exhausting inside. This is why awareness is so important, because the moment you become deeply honest with yourself, you begin noticing the difference between someone who truly loves your soul and someone who only loves the emotional control they have over you. And once you see that difference clearly, your entire life begins changing. Your healing becomes dangerous to those who benefited from your pain. One of the strangest and most painful experiences in life is realizing that some people become uncomfortable the moment you begin healing. You would think the people who love you would feel happy seeing you become peaceful, emotionally strong, and mentally free. You would think they would support your growth, encourage your healing, and celebrate your happiness. But sadly, this is not always what happens. Sometimes, the moment you begin changing in a healthy way, certain people slowly begin pulling away from you. Their energy changes, their behavior changes, the connection no longer feels the same. And this can feel deeply confusing because you are finally becoming healthier, calmer, and more emotionally aware. So why does the relationship suddenly feel heavier instead of lighter? The answer is painful but important. Some people became comfortable with the version of you that was emotionally weak, insecure, and easy to control. They became comfortable with the version of you that constantly chased their attention, the version that tolerated disrespect because it feared loneliness, the version that kept apologizing even when it was not wrong, the version that kept sacrificing its peace just to keep the relationship alive. And when you begin healing, you slowly stop doing those things. You stop begging for emotional validation. You stop over-explaining yourself. You stop allowing people to cross your boundaries without consequences. You stop accepting behavior that destroys your peace. And suddenly, the people who benefited from your emotional pain begin feeling uncomfortable around the new you, not because your healing is wrong, but because your healing removes the control they once had over you. Many unhealthy relationships survive because one person remains emotionally dependent. One person keeps chasing while the other keeps receiving. One person keeps sacrificing while the other keeps taking, and the entire relationship becomes built on emotional imbalance. This is why healing changes relationships so deeply, because healing changes your energy. When you truly begin healing, your mind becomes quieter. You stop reacting emotionally to everything. You stop feeling desperate for approval. You stop trying to force people to love you correctly. You stop abandoning yourself to avoid rejection. And people who were comfortable controlling your emotions suddenly realize they can no longer reach you the same way. This is why some people react negatively when you finally begin respecting yourself. The moment you say no, they call you selfish. The moment you become calm, they call you distant. The moment you stop chasing them, They accuse you of changing. But what truly changed is this: you finally stopped betraying yourself. And for many people that is threatening, because emotionally aware people are harder to manipulate. Emotionally healed people do not depend on crumbs of affection to feel worthy. They no longer allow guilt, fear, or loneliness to control their decisions. And people who relied on your emotional dependence often feel powerless when you finally become emotionally free. Buddhism teaches that awareness destroys illusion. The moment you begin waking up emotionally, you start seeing patterns you ignored before. You begin noticing how certain people only gave affection when you obeyed them emotionally. You begin noticing how they became cold whenever you focused on yourself. You begin noticing how exhausted you felt after constantly carrying the emotional weight of the relationship alone. And once you truly see these things clearly, it becomes impossible to completely return to the old version of yourself. This is why healing can feel lonely at first, because awakening changes your relationships. Some connections naturally become weaker because they were never built on healthy love. They were built on emotional need, insecurity, fear, or control. And the more peaceful you become, the more uncomfortable those unhealthy connections begin feeling. Many people think healing only means becoming happier, but real healing also means seeing painful truths clearly. It means realizing some relationships survived only because you kept ignoring your own pain. It means understanding that certain people only felt safe around you when you had low self-worth. And this realization can break your heart, because part of you still wants to believe they truly loved you deeply. But Buddhism teaches something important about attachment. People who are deeply attached to control often confuse possession with love. They become emotionally attached to the role you played in their life, not the reality of who you truly are. They become attached to your availability, your emotional softness, your patience, your willingness to stay no matter how hurt you feel. But real love grows when you heal. Real love becomes stronger when you become stronger. A healthy person does not fear your emotional freedom. They do not panic when you stop depending on them for validation. They do not punish your healing. Instead, they feel happy seeing you peaceful, confident, emotionally balanced, and alive again. Because real love wants your soul to breathe freely, not remain emotionally trapped. This is why healing is one of the most powerful things a person can experience. Healing changes not only the way you see yourself, but also the way you see every relationship around you. You stop confusing emotional suffering with deep connection. You stop believing that love must always hurt. You stop chasing people who make you feel emotionally exhausted. And slowly, something beautiful begins happening inside you. You begin understanding that peace feels better than emotional chaos. You begin understanding that self-respect feels better than temporary validation. You begin understanding that being alone is less painful than constantly abandoning yourself to keep unhealthy relationships alive. And that understanding changes your entire life forever. You lose inner peace the moment you start abandoning yourself. One of the deepest forms of suffering is not loud. It does not always look dramatic from the outside. Sometimes it happens very quietly, slowly, over many years, while nobody notices what is happening inside your heart. It begins the moment you start abandoning yourself to keep other people comfortable. At first, the sacrifices seem small. You stay silent during moments that hurt you. You ignore disrespect because you want to avoid conflict. You keep forgiving behavior that keeps breaking your heart. You pretend certain things do not affect you even though they stay in your mind for days. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin teaching yourself that your feelings are less important than keeping the relationship alive. This is where inner peace slowly begins disappearing. Because every time you betray your emotions to protect someone else's comfort, something inside you becomes heavier. Many people are walking around emotionally exhausted, not because life is too difficult, but because they have spent years ignoring their own emotional truth. They smile while feeling empty. They stay available while feeling drained. They continue giving love while secretly feeling emotionally abandoned themselves. And after a while, their soul becomes tired, not physically tired, spiritually tired. the kind of tiredness sleep cannot fix. Buddhism teaches that suffering grows when we become disconnected from our true self. And one of the fastest ways to lose yourself is constantly shaping your life around other people's expectations while ignoring your own emotional needs. You begin living for approval instead of peace. You become hyper-aware of everyone else's emotions while becoming disconnected from your own. You constantly think about how others will react, how others will feel, how others will judge you, and eventually, your entire emotional world becomes controlled by fear of disappointing people. This creates a very painful inner conflict, because deep inside, your heart knows the truth. Your heart knows when something feels wrong. Your heart knows when you are not being respected. Your heart knows when you are forcing yourself to stay in situations that are hurting you emotionally. But the mind keeps saying, "Stay quiet. Do not upset anyone. Just keep the peace. Maybe things will change." And so you continue abandoning yourself little by little. This is why some people feel anxiety even inside relationships that look normal from the outside. Their nervous system is exhausted from constantly suppressing emotions. Their mind is tired from constantly walking on emotional eggshells. Their spirit feels trapped because they are no longer living honestly. When you constantly silence yourself to avoid conflict, peace disappears. When you constantly ignore your boundaries to avoid rejection, peace disappears. When you constantly prioritize other people's comfort over your emotional health, peace disappears. And many people do not realize how much emotional pain they are carrying until they finally experience a moment of real peace. A moment where they no longer need to pretend, no longer need to explain themselves endlessly, no longer need to beg for basic emotional care, and suddenly they realize how emotionally heavy their old life truly felt. Buddhism teaches that attachment often keeps people trapped inside suffering because they become afraid of losing connection. So instead of listening to their inner truth, they continue tolerating emotional pain to avoid loneliness. But there is something deeply important many people must understand. Loneliness does not only happen when you are alone. Sometimes the deepest loneliness comes from constantly abandoning yourself while surrounded by people. There are people in relationships who feel completely unseen, completely unheard, completely emotionally disconnected, because nobody around them truly knows the real person hidden behind the performance. And eventually, this emotional disconnect creates exhaustion. You stop recognizing yourself. You stop trusting yourself. You stop feeling emotionally safe inside your own mind. That is why self-respect is so important in Buddhism and in emotional healing. Because the moment you stop respecting your own emotions, other people slowly begin doing the same. If you continue teaching people that your boundaries do not matter, your feelings do not matter, and your peace does not matter, unhealthy people will gladly accept that version of you. But your soul will continue suffering quietly. Real peace begins the moment you stop abandoning yourself. It begins the moment you become honest about what hurts you, honest about what drains you, honest about the relationships that leave you emotionally broken instead of emotionally safe. And this honesty can feel terrifying at first because many people fear losing connection. They fear disappointing others. They fear becoming alone. But Buddhism teaches something powerful. Inner peace is impossible when your outer life constantly betrays your inner truth. You cannot heal while constantly pretending. You cannot feel free while constantly shrinking yourself. You cannot feel emotionally calm while constantly carrying relationships that destroy your spirit. At some point, healing requires courage. The courage to stop performing. The courage to stop people-pleasing. The courage to stop sacrificing your emotional well-being just to remain accepted. And the beautiful thing is this: the moment you stop abandoning yourself, your soul slowly begins returning to life. Your mind becomes quieter, your heart feels lighter, your emotions stop feeling trapped, and for the first time in a very long time, you begin feeling connected to yourself again. That is where true peace begins. Fear creates attachments that slowly destroy the soul. Many people stay inside painful relationships, not because they are deeply loved, but because they are deeply afraid. Afraid of being alone, afraid of losing emotional attachment, afraid of starting over, afraid that nobody else will ever understand them again. And slowly, fear becomes stronger than truth. This is one of the saddest things that can happen to the human heart, because deep inside, many people already know the relationship is hurting them. They already know the connection feels emotionally exhausting. They already know they are losing their peace, confidence, and emotional freedom, but they keep staying, not because the relationship feels healthy, because leaving feels terrifying. Buddhism teaches that attachment creates suffering because the mind becomes emotionally dependent on things it fears losing. And when fear controls your attachment, your entire emotional world becomes unstable. Your happiness begins depending on another person's attention, mood, behavior, and approval. You stop feeling emotionally safe within yourself. Instead, your emotions begin rising and falling based on how someone else treats you. If they give attention, you feel temporarily happy. If they become distant, you feel anxious. If they ignore you, you begin overthinking everything. If they suddenly become warm again, you feel relief, and slowly, your emotional peace becomes controlled by unpredictable moments of affection. This creates a very painful emotional cycle, because fear-based attachment does not feel calm. It feels unstable. One moment you feel loved, the next moment you feel emotionally abandoned. One moment you feel close to them, the next moment you feel invisible, and your mind becomes trapped inside constant emotional confusion. Many people mistake this emotional intensity for deep love, but often it is simply emotional dependency mixed with fear of loss. Real love should not constantly make you feel emotionally unsafe. Real love should not make you afraid to speak honestly. It should not make you feel like your entire worth depends on someone staying in your life. But fear slowly convinces people to accept emotional pain they would never normally accept. Fear says, if you leave, you may never find love again. If you stop tolerating this behavior, they might disappear. If you ask for respect, you may lose the relationship. So instead of protecting their peace, people begin protecting the attachment itself, even when the attachment is destroying them emotionally. This is why so many people stay connected to situations that continuously break their heart. They become addicted to emotional hope. They keep waiting for things to finally become healthy again. They keep remembering the good moments while ignoring the emotional damage happening every day. And because they are emotionally attached, they begin making excuses for behavior that hurts them deeply. They tolerate disrespect, mixed signals, coldness, manipulation, emotional inconsistency, not because they deserve it, but because fear makes people accept less than they truly need. Buddhism teaches that the mind clings tightly to things that create emotional identity. And many people become so emotionally attached to certain relationships that they no longer know who they are without them. The relationship becomes part of their identity. Their thoughts revolve around it. Their emotions revolve around it. Their peace revolves around it. And this creates suffering because now the mind becomes trapped. Instead of living freely, you begin emotionally surviving from moment to moment. You overthink small changes in behavior. You analyze messages repeatedly. You become emotionally exhausted trying to keep the connection stable. And the saddest part is that while you are fighting to hold on to the relationship, you slowly lose yourself. Your confidence weakens. Your inner peace weakens. Your emotional stability weakens because fear slowly drains the soul. Fear-based attachment makes people stay where they are not emotionally safe. It makes them ignore red flags. It makes them betray their own intuition. Deep inside, their heart already knows the truth, but fear keeps whispering, "Stay a little longer, maybe things will finally change." But many times the relationship only survives because one person keeps sacrificing themselves emotionally, and eventually the soul becomes tired. Not tired of loving, tired of suffering. This is why healing often begins with honesty. The honesty to admit that some attachments are built more on fear than genuine peace. The honesty to admit that constantly feeling anxious, emotionally drained, and mentally exhausted is not what healthy love should feel like. Buddhism teaches that freedom begins the moment you stop clinging to what destroys your inner peace. And this can feel incredibly painful at first because letting go of unhealthy attachment often feels like losing a part of yourself. Your mind becomes scared, your emotions panic, you suddenly feel empty without the emotional connection you became dependent on. But over time, something beautiful begins happening. The emotional fog slowly clears. You begin breathing easier, sleeping peacefully, thinking clearly. You begin realizing how heavy your heart had become while carrying constant emotional fear. And slowly, you stop confusing emotional suffering with love. You begin understanding that healthy love feels safe, steady, honest, peaceful. It does not constantly leave you anxious, insecure, and emotionally unstable. Real love brings clarity to the soul. Fear-based attachment brings chaos to the mind. And the moment you finally understand that difference, your entire emotional life begins changing, because you stop chasing relationships that only survive through fear, and you begin choosing peace instead. Your silence terrifies people who fed on your reactions. One of the most powerful changes that can happen inside a person is emotional silence. Not coldness, not hatred, not revenge, just silence. A calm mind, a peaceful heart, a person who no longer reacts emotionally to every little thing. And strangely, this peaceful version of you can make certain people deeply uncomfortable, because many unhealthy relationships survive through emotional reactions. Some people become used to controlling your emotions. They become used to your overthinking, your fear, your constant explanations, and your emotional vulnerability. They become comfortable knowing they can affect your mood whenever they want. They know exactly how to make you anxious, guilty, confused, or emotionally unstable. And for a long time, you may not even notice this happening. You simply believe you are trying to fix the relationship. You believe you are fighting for love. You believe you are protecting the connection. But slowly, you begin realizing something painful. You are carrying the emotional weight of the entire relationship alone. You are the one constantly trying to solve problems, constantly trying to explain yourself, constantly trying to bring back peace after emotional chaos. And the more reactive you become, the more power unhealthy people quietly gain over your emotions. This is why emotional silence becomes so powerful, because the moment you stop reacting the same way, the unhealthy dynamic begins breaking apart. The moment you stop begging for understanding, the moment you stop chasing after emotional validation, the moment you stop explaining yourself endlessly to people committed to misunderstanding you, everything changes. And people who were comfortable controlling your emotions suddenly begin panicking. Not because they lost love, because they lost access to your emotional energy. Buddhism teaches that inner stillness creates awareness. When the mind becomes calm, you begin seeing things clearly that emotional chaos once hid from you. You begin noticing patterns you ignored before. You notice how certain people only give attention after hurting you. You notice how some people create emotional confusion and then blame you for reacting emotionally to it. You notice how exhausted you feel after constantly defending your feelings to people who never truly listen. And once your awareness deepens, your reactions slowly become quieter. You no longer feel the need to argue constantly. You no longer feel desperate to prove your value. You no longer feel emotionally controlled by every shift in someone's mood. This is what emotional freedom starts looking like. And unhealthy people often fear this version of you, because emotionally peaceful people are difficult to manipulate. A calm person thinks clearly. A calm person notices disrespect faster. A calm person no longer depends on emotional crumbs to feel worthy. And people who once controlled you through guilt, silence, emotional distance, or confusion begin realizing those methods no longer work the same way. This is why some people become angry when you stop reacting. When you stay calm instead of arguing, they become frustrated. When you stop chasing them emotionally, they become confused. When you stop trying to prove your love constantly, they suddenly accuse you of becoming distant or cold. But the truth is, you are simply becoming emotionally balanced. For many years, you may have believed that constantly reacting emotionally meant you cared deeply. You may have believed that over-explaining yourself would finally make someone understand your heart. You may have believed that if you loved hard enough, stayed patient enough, and sacrificed enough, the relationship would eventually become peaceful. But Buddhism teaches something important. Peace cannot grow inside constant emotional chaos. If a relationship continuously destroys your nervous system, drains your energy, and keeps your mind trapped in confusion, then something unhealthy is happening beneath the surface. Real love should not require endless emotional suffering to survive. Real love does not constantly test your emotional stability. It does not feed on your fear. It does not survive through emotional pressure. Healthy love feels emotionally safe. You can breathe. You can speak honestly. You can exist without constantly fearing rejection, punishment, or emotional withdrawal. But when people become emotionally attached to controlling your reactions, they often lose interest in your actual well-being. The relationship slowly becomes centered around emotional power instead of emotional connection. And this is why silence becomes healing, because silence reconnects you to yourself. When you stop reacting constantly, you begin hearing your own thoughts again. You begin feeling your own emotions clearly, instead of constantly drowning inside other people's emotional storms. You begin understanding what truly brings peace into your life and what quietly destroys it. Many people are afraid of silence because silence reveals truth. Without constant emotional noise, excuses become weaker. Manipulation becomes easier to recognize. False love becomes harder to ignore. And slowly, your soul begins waking up. You stop needing constant reassurance from people who continuously hurt you. You stop chasing emotional closeness from people who only value you when you are emotionally dependent on them. You stop explaining your worth to people determined not to see it. This is one of the deepest forms of emotional healing, not becoming emotionless, but becoming emotionally free, free from the need to react to everything. Free from the need to beg for understanding, free from the fear of losing people who only loved your emotional weakness. And the beautiful thing is this: the calmer you become, the clearer life becomes. Your mind feels lighter, your heart feels safer, your energy stops feeling trapped inside endless emotional battles. And for the first time in a long time, you begin protecting your peace instead of sacrificing it. That is when true healing truly begins. Real love never demands you to shrink yourself to be accepted. One of the clearest signs of real love is this: you do not have to lose yourself to keep it. You do not have to become smaller, quieter, emotionally weaker, less honest, less alive. Real love does not ask you to hide pieces of your soul just to remain accepted. But many people spend years inside relationships where they feel pressured to shrink themselves emotionally. They become careful about how much truth they speak. They become afraid of expressing their real feelings. They begin hiding their growth, their confidence, and even their happiness, because deep inside, they fear the relationship may change if they become too strong. This is what unhealthy attachment often does. It quietly teaches people that love must be protected through self-sacrifice. So instead of becoming more free inside relationships, people slowly become emotionally trapped inside them. They stop speaking openly, stop dreaming freely, stop behaving naturally, and eventually, they become strangers to themselves. Many people do not even realize how much they have emotionally shrunk until they finally meet someone who allows them to breathe. Someone who does not punish honesty. Someone who does not become angry when boundaries are created. Someone who does not feel threatened by growth. And suddenly, for the first time in years, they feel emotionally safe enough to relax. That is what healthy love feels like. It feels safe, steady, calm, not confusing, not emotionally exhausting, not constantly painful. Buddhism teaches that true compassion allows freedom. Real love cannot exist where control dominates the connection, because love that requires fear, silence, and self-erasure is not love in its pure form. It becomes attachment mixed with insecurity, and insecure attachment often becomes possessive. It says, stay the same, do not outgrow me, do not become too independent, do not create distance, do not change in ways I cannot control. But real love says something very different. Real love says, heal, grow, become stronger, discover yourself, find peace. A person who truly loves you does not become uncomfortable when your confidence grows. They do not become emotionally distant when you begin respecting yourself more. They do not punish you for protecting your emotional health. Instead, they feel proud watching you become whole again. Because healthy love wants your soul to feel free, not trapped. Many people confuse emotional struggle with deep connection because they were taught that love must always hurt. They believe suffering proves loyalty. They believe emotional chaos proves passion. They believe constantly fighting for someone proves commitment. But Buddhism teaches that suffering often grows from attachment, fear, and emotional dependency. Peaceful love may feel unfamiliar to people who spent years surviving emotionally unstable relationships. At first, calm love can even feel boring because the nervous system became addicted to emotional highs and lows. The mind became used to chasing validation, fixing emotional problems, and constantly trying to earn affection. But over time, emotionally healthy love begins healing the heart in ways emotional chaos never could. Because you finally stop feeling afraid all the time. You stop wondering where you stand. You stop overanalyzing every message. You stop carrying the emotional pressure of keeping the relationship alive alone. You simply feel accepted, not for the version of yourself that performs perfectly, not for the version that stays silent, not for the version that sacrifices everything, but for the real you. And this kind of acceptance changes people deeply. Many people cry the first time they experience emotionally safe love, because they realize how much pain they normalized in the past. They realize they spent years begging for emotional safety from people who only gave temporary affection mixed with confusion. They realize they spent years shrinking themselves just to remain loved. And one of the saddest things about emotional shrinking is that it happens slowly. You do not notice it immediately. At first, you only stay quiet about small things. Then you begin hiding bigger feelings. Then you begin avoiding certain topics completely. Then you stop expressing your real personality around certain people. And eventually, you no longer feel emotionally free inside your own relationships. Your soul begins living in survival mode. Buddhism teaches that attachment to approval creates suffering because the mind becomes trapped trying to maintain acceptance. You begin living according to what keeps other people comfortable instead of what keeps your spirit peaceful. And over time, this becomes emotionally exhausting because no human being can feel truly peaceful while constantly hiding their authentic self. Real love should allow expansion. You should feel more connected to yourself, not less. More peaceful, not more anxious. More alive, not emotionally drained. Healthy love creates emotional safety where honesty can exist without fear. You are allowed to disagree, allowed to have boundaries, allowed to grow, allowed to protect your peace without constantly fearing abandonment. And the beautiful thing is this: the right people never ask you to destroy yourself just to keep them. They do not fear your growth because your healing does not threaten them. Your confidence does not intimidate them. Your emotional independence does not make them feel powerless, because their love was never built on controlling you. It was built on understanding you. This is why emotionally mature love feels different from attachment. Attachment says, "Do not leave me." Real love says, "I want your soul to feel free even while loving me." And that kind of love feels peaceful deep inside the heart. Because for the first time, you are not being loved for your obedience. You are being loved for your truth. And once a person experiences that kind of love, they begin understanding how deeply unhealthy relationships were suffocating their spirit before. That realization becomes life-changing because they finally understand this truth. Love should never require you to become smaller to deserve it. Real love gives your soul room to breathe. Freeing your heart from control is the beginning of true peace. There comes a moment in life when a person becomes emotionally tired of carrying relationships that continuously destroy their inner peace. Not angry, not hateful, just deeply tired. Tired of overthinking, tired of emotional confusion, tired of constantly sacrificing themselves to keep other people comfortable, and slowly, something inside them begins waking up. They begin realizing that they cannot continue living this way forever. They cannot continue begging for love that constantly hurts them. They cannot continue shrinking themselves to remain accepted. They cannot continue carrying emotional pain while pretending everything is okay. And this realization becomes the beginning of transformation, because true healing often begins the moment a person finally chooses peace over attachment. Buddhism teaches that suffering grows when the mind clings too tightly to people, expectations, and emotional dependency. The more tightly the mind holds on to unhealthy attachment, the more pain it creates inside itself. This is why many people feel emotionally trapped for years. They become attached not only to people but also to hope, memories, emotional habits, and fear of letting go. Even when the relationship hurts them deeply, part of them still keeps holding on to who the person used to be, holding on to old memories, holding on to the hope that one day everything will finally feel peaceful again. But sometimes peace does not arrive because the relationship changes. Sometimes peace arrives because you finally do. This is one of the hardest truths many people ever learn, because letting go of emotional control feels terrifying at first. The mind becomes scared, the heart feels empty. You suddenly realize how much of your emotional world was built around another person's approval, attention, or emotional presence. And for a while, the silence can feel uncomfortable. You may miss them. You may question yourself. You may even feel guilty for choosing your peace. But slowly, something beautiful begins happening inside you. Your mind starts becoming quieter. The constant anxiety slowly weakens. The emotional pressure slowly fades. The need to constantly chase understanding begins disappearing. And for the first time in a very long time, you begin hearing your own soul again. This is the beginning of emotional freedom, not becoming emotionless, not becoming cold, but finally becoming free from emotional chains that kept your spirit trapped. Many people do not realize how heavy their heart became until they finally put the emotional weight down. They become so used to emotional chaos that peace feels unfamiliar at first. They become so used to overthinking that silence feels strange. They become so used to chasing love that resting feels uncomfortable. But Buddhism teaches that inner peace is not found by controlling other people. It is found by releasing attachment to what continuously disturbs the mind. And one of the greatest forms of healing is learning this: you do not need everyone to understand your heart in order to protect it. You do not need everyone to approve of your boundaries. You do not need everyone to agree with your healing. You do not need to keep sacrificing your emotional well-being just to remain loved, because real love never asks you to destroy yourself to keep it alive. Real love does not fear your freedom. It does not fear your growth. It does not punish your healing. People who truly love you want your soul to feel peaceful, even if that peace creates change. But unhealthy attachment fears change because control survives through emotional dependence. This is why some people become uncomfortable when you stop reacting emotionally. They become uncomfortable when you stop chasing them. They become uncomfortable when you finally realize your peace matters too. Because the moment you stop seeking your worth through their approval, their emotional power over you weakens, and this changes your entire life. You begin sleeping peacefully again. You begin breathing deeply again. You begin feeling emotionally connected to yourself again. The fear slowly loses its grip on your heart. You stop feeling desperate for attention. You stop feeling terrified of losing people who continuously hurt you. You stop believing that emotional suffering is necessary to deserve love, and slowly, your spirit begins returning home to itself. This is what true healing feels like. It feels like becoming lighter inside. It feels like finally putting down emotional weight you carried for years. It feels like no longer fighting endless battles inside your mind every single day. Buddhism teaches that freedom begins within. The external world may not immediately change, but the moment attachment loosens its grip on your mind, suffering begins losing power over you. And one of the most peaceful moments in life is realizing this. You no longer need to abandon yourself to keep people in your life. You no longer need to prove your worth through suffering. You no longer need to chase people who only loved the version of you they could control, because your soul deserves more than survival. It deserves peace. It deserves honesty. It deserves emotional safety. It deserves relationships where love feels calm instead of painful. And the beautiful thing is that once your heart truly experiences inner peace, you begin seeing life differently. You stop chasing emotional chaos. You stop confusing suffering with connection. You stop begging for love from people who continuously drain your spirit. Instead, you begin protecting your energy carefully. You begin choosing relationships that feel healthy, conversations that feel honest, connections that allow your soul to breathe freely, and little by little, your life begins changing from the inside out. Not because you became cold, but because you finally understood your peace is sacred, and freeing your heart from emotional control is not selfish. It is one of the deepest acts of self-love and awakening a human being can experience. Because the moment you stop living for unhealthy attachment, you finally begin living for inner peace. And maybe this is the truth your heart needed to hear today. You were never difficult to love. You were simply trying to receive love from people who only felt comfortable when you ignored your own worth. For so long, you carried relationships by sacrificing your peace. You stayed quiet to avoid losing people. You kept forgiving pain that slowly exhausted your soul. You kept shrinking yourself, hoping one day you would finally feel fully loved. But real love was never supposed to feel like emotional survival. Real love does not ask you to betray yourself. It does not make you afraid to speak honestly. It does not force you to abandon your peace just to keep someone close. Buddhism teaches that suffering begins when we cling too tightly to what disturbs the mind. And sometimes the greatest awakening in life is realizing that protecting your peace is not selfish. It is necessary. Not everyone will understand your healing. Not everyone will understand your boundaries. Some people only felt comfortable around the version of you that stayed emotionally weak and endlessly available. But you were not born to spend your entire life carrying emotional pain just to make others comfortable. You were born to live with peace inside your heart. So slowly, let go of the need to chase approval. Let go of the fear of disappointing everyone. Let go of the guilt that appears whenever you finally choose yourself. Because the more honest you become with your soul, the lighter your life becomes. And one day you will look back and realize something beautiful. The moment you stopped abandoning yourself was the moment your healing truly began. So tonight, breathe deeply, be gentle with your heart, and remember this quietly. The right people will never ask you to become smaller just to be loved. They will love your truth, your peace, your growth, your healing, and most importantly, they will never make you feel guilty for finally choosing yourself. If this message found you during a difficult season of your life, perhaps your soul was ready to hear it. And if these words brought even a little peace to your heart, you can quietly subscribe to the Inner Buddha Code and walk this path with us. Protect your peace gently. Not everyone deserves access to your heart. May you never again confuse emotional suffering with love. And may you never lose yourself trying to stay loved by people who only valued your silence. Take a deep breath tonight. Your healing matters too.